She left everything behind to follow love across an ocean. But on a lonely Texas farm, her dream man's secrets turned that love into a living nightmare. Lina Morales grew up in a cramped apartment in Manila where the walls were thin and dreams had to fit into small spaces. Every evening, after long days working at a cafe, she scrolled through pictures of America. Endless highways, golden fields, and big houses where people looked happy and free. It felt like another world, one she longed to touch. Her chance came when she met Jack Turner through a Facebook group for people interested in farming and travel. Jack was older, rugged, and spoke with confidence that pulled her in. He told her he owned a large ranch in Texas, where he raised horses and lived a peaceful, simple life. His messages were filled with warmth, good mornings, and promises of a new beginning. He said she was beautiful, kind, and too good for the noisy city that didn't value her. Lina believed him because no one had ever made her feel so seen. When he invited her to visit, she hesitated at first, but he sent her photos of his farm and even paid for her plane ticket. Her family worried she was rushing, but Lina saw it as love, destiny, even. She packed her few belongings and said goodbye to everything she knew. At the airport, she cried, not from fear but excitement. She imagined wide open skies, a fresh start, and a man waiting to make all her dreams real. When the plane landed in Dallas, she breathed in the scent of jet fuel and hope. The air felt different, promising. Jack met her with a smile and a strong handshake. He looked just like his pictures, maybe kinder. As they drove away from the city toward miles of empty land, Lina thought she had finally found home. The road stretched endlessly as the truck rumbled through the Texas countryside, miles of dry grass and wooden fences blurring together. Lina pressed her face to the window, trying to take it all in. The sky was enormous, painted in shades of pink and gold, so different from the gray skyline she had grown up beneath. Jack seemed proud of the emptiness, pointing out landmarks that weren't really there: an old windmill, a dusty barn, a patch of dying trees. As the hours passed, the roads became narrower, the houses fewer. When they finally turned onto a gravel path, Lina's excitement faltered. The farm didn't look like the photos. The white fence was chipped and leaning. The grass was overgrown, and the house itself stood alone, its paint peeling, the windows dull. Jack smiled and told her it just needed a woman's touch. She wanted to believe him. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and oil. There were no family photos, no warmth, only silence. Her room was small, with one window that faced a line of trees. Jack said there was no need to lock doors, but that night, she heard him bolt the front door from the outside. The next morning, she discovered there was no phone signal, no internet, and the nearest town was 20 miles away. Jack called it peaceful. Lina felt trapped. When she asked about neighbors, he simply said there weren't any worth knowing. Still, she told herself it was temporary, that once she settled in, things would get better. But every night, as darkness fell over the empty fields, the silence grew heavier, and the house seemed to breathe with her. Something in the stillness whispered that she wasn't as welcome as she thought. Life on the farm quickly settled into a strange rhythm. Each morning, Jack woke Lina before sunrise, handing her a list of chores written in neat block letters. She fed the horses, cleaned the chicken coop, washed clothes by hand, and cooked every meal. He told her that hard work built character, that she should be grateful for the peace and quiet. Lina tried to adapt, convincing herself this was part of country living. But small things began to unsettle her. Jack kept all the doors locked, even during the day. He took her passport and said he would keep it safe. The landline phone never worked, and he laughed whenever she asked about getting internet. He didn't like her walking too far, saying the land could be dangerous. Whenever she disobeyed, his temper flared in sharp, unexpected bursts. She started noticing things around the house that didn't belong. A hairbrush on the dresser that wasn't hers. A pink scarf tucked in the closet. A photograph half burned in the fireplace, showing Jack standing beside a woman she didn't recognize. When she asked about it, his face turned cold, and he told her not to touch what wasn't hers. That night, he didn't speak a word at dinner. Days blurred together, each one quieter than the last. The sound of her own footsteps became her only company. One night, while taking scraps to the barn, she heard something faint, a low, muffled cry. It came from beneath the floorboards. The animals shifted uneasily, their eyes reflecting the dim light. Lina froze, her breath catching in her throat. She told herself it was the wind, yet deep inside, she knew it wasn't. From that night on, she avoided the barn, but the crying never truly stopped. It echoed inside her mind. Sleep became impossible after that night. The muffled cries haunted Lina every time she closed her eyes. She tried to ignore them, but the sound crept through the walls, soft at first, then louder, almost pleading. When Jack left one morning, saying he needed to pick up supplies from town, she finally gathered the courage to investigate. Her hands trembled as she stepped into the barn, sunlight slipping through cracks in the wooden walls. The air was thick with dust and a sour, metallic smell. She moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the shadows. Everything looked ordinary at first: tools, hay bales, rusted equipment, until she noticed a section of the floor that seemed newer than the rest. The boards were tightly nailed and covered with hay. She brushed it aside and found a metal latch. Her pulse raced as she forced it open with a crowbar she found nearby. The trapdoor creaked, revealing a dark space below. A wave of foul air rushed out, thick and heavy. She coughed, covering her nose, and lowered herself halfway down the steps. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering weakly. What she saw made her stomach twist. Piles of women's belongings scattered across the floor: shoes, purses, and passports. Some were covered in dust, others looked new. She reached for one of the passports and froze. The face staring back was familiar, one of the women from the photos she'd seen in Jack's drawer. Panic surged through her body. She dropped the passport and ran toward the door. Outside, she heard the distant rumble of Jack's truck approaching. The sound of the tires crunching on gravel grew louder. Her mind screamed for her to hide, but her feet wouldn't move. The trapdoor stood open behind her, evidence that could cost her everything. Lina's heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. She darted behind the barn, crouching low in the tall grass as Jack's truck pulled up. He stepped out slowly, slamming the door shut, his boots crunching on gravel. The engine cut off, leaving only the hum of insects and the distant caw of crows. She watched as he walked toward the barn, his head turning from side to side, eyes sharp and searching. When he reached the open trapdoor, he stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, he started to laugh, low, deep, and cruel. Lina bit her lip to keep from making a sound. She waited until he disappeared inside before running toward the tree line. The dry grass scraped against her legs, and the air tore through her lungs. Behind her, she heard shouting, her name echoing across the fields, followed by the sound of something metallic being dragged. She didn't look back. She ran until the barn was only a blur against the horizon. Reaching the main road, she saw headlights in the distance, a truck approaching. She waved her arms desperately, screaming for help. For a brief moment, it slowed, but then it drove past, the driver too afraid to stop for a stranger in the dark. Seconds later, another pair of headlights appeared, Jack's. The truck swerved violently, blocking her path. He stepped out, his face twisted in fury, holding a length of rope. Lina tried to run, but her foot caught on a root, and she fell hard onto the dirt. He grabbed her by the arm, whispering that she had made a terrible mistake. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the barn's outline under the moon, waiting for her return. When Lina woke, everything was dark. Her wrists ached, and the air was heavy with the smell of oil and rust. She realized she was in the basement, the cold floor pressing against her skin. Chains clinked softly when she tried to move. A thin beam of light came from a crack in the wooden ceiling, just enough to reveal the rough concrete walls around her. She called for help until her voice broke, but only silence answered. Hours passed before the door above creaked open. Jack's boots thudded on the steps, and a faint light from his flashlight cut through the darkness. He didn't speak. He slid a metal tray toward her with a piece of bread and a cup of water, then turned back without a word. The door slammed, and the lock clicked. Days turned into weeks. Lina marked time by scratching lines into the wall with a piece of metal she found near a pipe. The only sounds were the distant hum of machines and the faint creak of floorboards above when Jack moved around the house. Sometimes she heard music, country songs drifting down from an old radio, cheerful and cruel in contrast to her misery. She whispered to herself just to remember her own voice. One day, While crawling in the corner, she found something buried under the dirt, a small silver bracelet engraved with initials that weren't hers. It was another woman's. The realization hit her like a wave. She wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. That night, she used the metal shard to carve her name and the date into the wall, a desperate message for whoever might come after. Above her head, she heard a car engine stop and a new voice speaking to Jack. The voice above was unfamiliar, softer, younger, uncertain. Lina pressed her ear against the cold ceiling, straining to hear. Jack mentioned something about hiring help, someone to assist with heavy work around the property. The new voice belonged to a man named Ethan, a drifter looking for steady pay. For days, Lina listened as he moved about the farm, fixing fences and tending to the animals. His footsteps were lighter than Jack's, his tone polite. She began to tap on the pipes at night, hoping he might hear. The first few nights, there was no response. But one evening, after a series of quiet knocks, she heard a pause, then 3 faint taps in return. Hope surged through her for the first time in months. Ethan started noticing things that didn't add up. Jack was secretive about certain areas of the farm, especially the barn and the cellar. He always kept the keys with him and became angry whenever Ethan wandered too far. One afternoon, while Jack was away, Ethan followed the tapping sound he'd been hearing. It led him to the basement door, hidden behind a stack of barrels. He pried it open and descended the stairs cautiously. When his flashlight beam swept across the room, it froze on Lina. She was pale, thin, her wrists bruised from the chains. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered for help. Terrified, Ethan promised he would come back later that night when Jack was asleep. He didn't want to risk being caught. Lina nodded weakly, clutching his hand for a moment before he disappeared. When night fell, Ethan returned with his phone and a flashlight, heart racing. But when he reached the basement, the chains were empty. On the wall, written in scratches, were just 4 words: "He moved me again." Ethan drove straight to the police station, his hands shaking as he told them everything. He described the basement, the chains, the woman begging for help. But the sheriff only frowned, saying Jack Turner was a respected man in town. Jack donated to local fairs and often helped the church with repairs. They dismissed Ethan's story as wild imagination from an outsider. Probably some domestic dispute, the sheriff said. Frustrated, Ethan went back to the farm to confront Jack himself. But when he arrived, the house was silent. The doors were unlocked, the lights off, and Jack's truck sat parked outside. Inside, the air was thick and stale, and there was a faint metallic smell coming from the barn. Ethan hesitated, then walked inside. The floorboards creaked under his boots. Everything seemed still, almost staged. Near the center of the barn, he saw a freshly dug patch of dirt covered with straw. His gut twisted. Before he could lift the shovel leaning nearby, he heard footsteps behind him, slow, deliberate. Jack stood in the doorway, smiling faintly, holding Ethan's dropped phone. "You shouldn't have come back," he said softly. That was the last time anyone saw Ethan alive. Days later, Jack told the locals Ethan had left for another job out west. People believed him, but strange rumors started spreading. Neighbors reported smoke rising from Jack's fields late at night, though no fires were ever found. A mail carrier noticed a foul odor near the barn and mentioned it to the sheriff, but no one followed up. It wasn't until months later, after a drought dried up the soil, that a new deputy received an anonymous tip about missing women linked to Jack Turner. When they finally dug behind the barn, what they found changed everything. The discovery shocked the entire county. Beneath the dry soil behind Jack Turner's barn, investigators uncovered several shallow graves. Each one contained the remains of women who had been reported missing over the past few years. Their passports, jewelry, and small personal belongings were buried nearby, as if displayed in some twisted collection. Among them were items Lina's family had described when they contacted authorities months earlier. The evidence was undeniable. Jack had been living a double life, luring women to his farm under the promise of love, only to trap and kill them. Yet, despite the gruesome findings, Jack himself was gone. The farmhouse was abandoned, dishes still on the table, and the front door left slightly open, swaying in the wind. Inside, investigators found the basement exactly as Ethan had described it. On one of the walls, carved deep into the concrete, were the words, "He is still here." The message was signed with Lina's name. The chilling phrase spread quickly through the community. Many believe she had written it shortly before her death, warning anyone who entered that Jack wasn't finished. Others whispered that maybe she had survived and left it as a final act of defiance. Over the following weeks, there were dozens of reported sightings. Drivers claimed to see Jack's truck parked along empty highways at night. Campers swore they heard footsteps outside their tents followed by a low whistle, the same tune neighbors said Jack used to hum while feeding his horses. The sheriff organized search parties, but Jack was never found. His face appeared on national news, his crimes discussed on talk shows and true crime documentaries. Still, no trace of him surfaced. Only the empty farmhouse remained, standing as a silent monument to the horror buried beneath its soil. Years passed, and Jack Turner's farm became a place no one wanted to visit. The fields grew wild, swallowing the fences, and the house decayed under the Texas sun. Locals called it the Widow's Acre, saying the ground there was cursed. Teenagers dared each other to drive by at night, claiming to see a woman's shadow in the windows or hear faint cries drifting across the fields. The property was eventually seized by the county, but every potential buyer backed out. Some said they heard footsteps inside the empty house during visits. Others said the lights flickered even though the power had long been cut. A few years later, a small documentary crew arrived, hoping to film a true crime feature about Lina Morales and the women who vanished. They set up cameras in the farmhouse and stayed overnight to capture atmospheric footage. Nothing unusual happened the first night, but when they reviewed their recordings, one clip showed a figure standing in the upstairs window, a woman's outline, perfectly still, though no one had been inside at the time. When they returned to that same room, they found words faintly scratched into the wall, "Don't let him in." The footage went viral, reigniting public fascination with the case. Paranormal investigators, journalists, and thrill-seekers began visiting the farm, each leaving with stories of whispers, cold air, or shadows moving against the light. The legend of Jack Turner and Lina Morales became both tragedy and warning, a reminder of how easily dreams can turn to nightmares. No one ever found Jack, though sightings continued along rural highways. Some say he still drives those lonely Texas roads at night, searching for his next dreamer. Others believe Lina never left, bound to the land where her story ended and his began.